Welcome, everyone, particularly those of you at the participating law schools, from the deans to the clinical professors, to the law students, to others in the legal community who are joining us today. We cannot truly start this meeting without the following recognition. There has never been a national infrastructure for eviction prevention in our country, nor, to be honest, has there ever been a truly humane and just national eviction policy. According to the Eviction Lab, in a normal non-recessionary year, 3.6 million eviction filings will take place, with a large percentage for back rent of only $500 to $600. Of course, some evictions are unavoidable and necessary, but with 97% lacking access to an attorney, it is heartbreaking to think of the devastation, the downward cycles, the loss of dignity, economic dignity, and even homelessness that often takes place in our country without any effort to prevent it for small amounts of funds. The emergency rental assistance in the American Rescue Plan is a major national experiment in whether we can have a national infrastructure, a national policy for a more just eviction policy. It is certainly one of the most challenging aspects of the American Rescue Plan because we had to start it up in over 50 states and 300 to 400 different jurisdictions. So for myself, Gene Sperling, as the coordinator of the American Rescue Plan, I don't think there was another plan that was at the same time as frustrating and painful at times, and ultimately as rewarding and inspiring as the emergency rental assistance. For all its challenges and difficulties, and yes, heartbreaks where it didn't work, this has been an extraordinary national experiment. Because for all the challenges, for the slower startup, at the end of this year, this country, having never even helped tens of thousands of people facing evictions in a year, will have helped over 3.5 million renters in a time of stress. 25 to $30 billion will have been committed or spent. And instead of the tsunami of evictions that we feared after the end of the national eviction moratorium, evictions rates are actually at 60%. They are less than 60% of a normal non-recessionary period. So all of you are part of a national experiment for a more humane eviction policy for access to justice that we must be committed to continuing in the years to come. Now, when Erica Pothig, my partner at the Domestic Policy Council, who works on housing policy, and I, when we did our early conversations with the Eviction Lab, Legal Services, American Bar Association, National Courts and States, and others, it was very clear that we couldn't just focus on the relief of the emergency rental assistance, that we had to look at the court system and the legal system if we were going to make meaningful progress, both in slowing the pace of evictions and giving us more time to help families that might face challenges after the moratorium ended, but also to start to make sure that this crisis was being used for something lasting and more meaningful. They had a suggestion. They said, is there any way the Department of Justice could get involved, that they could take a leadership role? They said, even though they did not have the power to compel, that the message from them that we should be nationwide supporting eviction diversion and access to counsel would have a significant response. On June 24th, that first response came. It was from the Associate Attorney General, Vanita Gupta. She wrote a national letter to all judges calling on them to institute court diversion. The power of that initial letter from Associate Attorney General Gupta was extraordinary. Now, I usually don't ever talk about my religion in a speech, but I will say that when we do Passover, Jews often say Dayenu. That would have been enough. I think we felt that that was an exceptional effort by the Justice Department on such a critical eviction issue of economic justice. And the Justice Department continued to take action. But then on August 11th, the Attorney General himself did something extraordinary, perhaps unprecedented. He called together all of the state Supreme Court judges and challenged them to move forward on eviction diversion. I'm sure there may have been other times an Attorney General has taken such a leadership role on such an issue where economic justice and access to justice merge, but it was an extraordinary meeting. And I think, again, we would have said Dayenu, that would have been enough. But that was not enough for the Attorney General or for Associate Attorney General Gupta. They wanted to do more. They continued to do more. And on August 30th, the Attorney General called on the entire legal profession to act with urgency to address the housing and eviction crisis, as we knew, as we now faced the end of the national moratorium. And many of you did not hesitate. Associate Attorney General Gupta and I spoke quickly after that to Trevor Morrison, the Dean of NYU, and Bill Traynor, the Dean of Georgetown. And we discussed whether it might be possible to get 10 or 15 law schools to agree to answer the call, to use their clinical law professions. Very quickly, they came back and said that 99 law schools in 35 states in Puerto Rico were making the commitment to move forward, committing their law schools to taking action on access to justice for those facing eviction. That was impressive, but that doesn't come close to what truly inspires me. What inspires me is that as we put together this conference, this summit today, it was so clear in the work and the research that we did that so many of you didn't just talk the talk, you have walked the walk. You will hear accounts from several places we chose, which are just examples of the law school students, the law school clinicals who have risen to the occasion, who are part of the 2,100 law students who've served over 81,000 hours to serve over 10,000 households in need, in distress. I think this is not only going to be remarkable for the heartbreak that you've prevented, that the dignity you've preserved, and the roofs over the heads that you have maintained, but I think this can be part of something more long lasting. And I think that is what all of us feel committed towards. As I introduce our Attorney General who made this call to action, of course, I could spend a lot of time reading through one of the most remarkable resumes that you could ever see, from clerking for Justice Brennan to the Court of Appeals to being the Attorney General of the United States. I'd like to make a more personal note, though, as I introduce Attorney General Garland. We had a friend, a mutual friend, former Chief Judge of the Second Circuit, Robert Katzman, who passed away this year. On another issue, representation for immigrants, he took a leadership role a decade ago, before others had, as you are now doing on eviction diversion. And even though he tragically passed this year, that legacy lives on. He started something that lived on even beyond his particular work. I believe that that is what we are doing here. And one thing I will say about Judge Katzman, and I will say this about Merrick Garland, and it may not be the traditional thing you hear in an introduction, but in my life, they are the two people I have seen who have been judges, who are not just admired, but just loved by their clerks, by generation of clerks who work closely with them in a subordinate position year after year, I've never seen, like with Judge Katzman, the number of clerks who are so devoted and admiring of Attorney General Garland goes beyond the credential list. It speaks to character. It speaks to the type of person he is. It explains why he's the type of person who would jump into this issue and help on eviction prevention. And I think it will speak to the legacy that he will leave. So with that, the floor is yours, Mr. Attorney General.
Well, thank you, Gene. Incredibly kind words. Really grateful. I'm grateful for your leadership in this important work and for inviting me to participate this morning. I'm grateful to the law school students, the professors, and the deans who are working on this project and have worked with us and who are here today. I'm even more grateful that when I issued the call for action to this community, you responded. On August 5th, I noted that as federal and state local eviction moratoria expired around the country, eviction filings were expected to spike and millions of Americans might lose their homes. So I asked you to help. I asked you to help tenants and landlords apply for rental assistance. I asked you to volunteer with your local legal aid provider, provide legal counsel to tenants as they applied for rental assistance, mediate disputes with landlords, or litigate eviction filings in court. And I asked you to help state courts implement their eviction diversion programs by acting as mediators or appointed counsels. I called on you as members of the legal community to use your skills, your education, your experience, and your time to help the most vulnerable among us. Today, we are celebrating the way in which you answered the call. Law students and lawyers from across the country stepped up to take on cases. You mobilized pop-up clinics and medical legal partnerships to help families facing eviction and to help them keep their homes. You helped our courts implement eviction diversion programs. You developed new digital platforms designed to ensure that housing court proceedings could be carried out fairly. You assisted your clients and your communities at a time when they needed it the most, when our country needed it the most. I thank you for the work you have already done, but I know I do not need to tell you that there is so much more to do. Today, 151 days since I asked you to answer the call to help Americans facing eviction, and 151 years since the Justice Department was founded, making real the promise of equal justice under law remains our urgent and unfinished mission. Fulfilling that promise demands that we work to ensure equal access to justice. Even before the pandemic, the Legal Services Corporation found that 86% of civil legal problems facing low-income Americans received inadequate or no legal help. We know that without equal access to justice, tenants are evicted, families are fractured, innocent people go to jail, jobs are lost, veterans are left helpless, immigrants are left homeless, consumers lose protection, debtors lose recourse, children lose support, and domestic violence victims lose safety. Without equal access to justice, the promise of equal justice rings hollow. In May of last year, I launched a comprehensive review to explore the ways in which the Justice Department could expand its role in advancing equal access to justice. Our conclusion was that we must fundamentally reimagine how we fulfill this responsibility. As a first step toward reinvigorating our efforts, we announced in October that the Justice Department has restored a standalone Office for Access to Justice. Its mission is to work in partnership with those on the front lines of legal services to identify and address the most urgent legal needs of communities across America. I've asked our new office to evaluate how we can leverage the unique capabilities of the Justice Department to spur innovation and improvement for administrative proceedings, federal courts, state courts, and legal services. Today, I'm once again asking you to be our partners in this effort. As law students, as leaders of our nation's law schools, and as lawyers, you are uniquely positioned to help fill the gaps in our legal system. To that end, the department's Office for Access to Justice will be opening a pathway for partnership proposals. We look forward to soon having more information and details to share with you about this exciting new effort. In my August call to action, I referenced Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy's call to lawyers at the height of the civil rights movement to use their knowledge and skills to protect the rights of the most vulnerable among us. Thank you for accepting the legal profession's obligation in this new period to put your abilities to work to support equal justice under law. And now I want to speak directly to the law students in the audience. In the words of another Kennedy, you are the new generation of Americans to whom the torch of the legal obligation is being passed. Your service these past 151 days assures me that the torch remains in good hands. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you so much, Mr. Attorney General, for that very substantive and inspiring remarks together. I want to take a moment to thank somebody else at the Justice Department who has played a key role in this, which is Burden Walker, who has been really absolutely critical, together with Emily Benfer, on our team on working to put together this this effort, and Burden has been really the glue that has helped so much put together these efforts. So thank you. Another part of the absolute critical part of the team, to say the least, comes at the Department of Treasury. While I coordinate the overall American Rescue Plan, very significant parts of the American Rescue Plan require the leadership of the Treasury Department. We're incredibly grateful to that constant partnership Erica and I are with Jacob Liebenluft, who leads the recovery team, Noel Poyo, who's been frontline on evictions, and many others. They've done extraordinary. But the ultimate leader of that, of the Treasury on the implementation of the American Rescue Plan and on the emergency rental assistance is the Deputy Secretary of Treasury, Wally Adeyemo, who was given the role at Treasury of being in charge of the overall implementation, designated to do that by Secretary Janet Yellen. Wally, of course, held very high positions in the Obama administration, actually ran the Obama Foundation, and now at the very young age of 40 is the Deputy Secretary of Treasury. He's been a great partner. He is still very actively working through so many of the practical issues that will continue on with the emergency rental assistance, including how it can be used to help with access to justice. So with that, Mr. Deputy Secretary, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Gene, and it was great to hear from the Attorney General. Let me start by thanking everyone who is watching for your commitment to helping prevent evictions in our country during the pandemic. Today, there are families that remain in their homes, children that are still in their schools, and communities that have been held together because of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program and the hard work and determination of countless Americans, like the people on this Zoom today. The work you've all committed yourselves to Providing legal services to families in need to help prevent evictions matter immensely. Research has found that housing instability increases the risk of job losses by as much as 22%. For children, studies show housing instability leads to poor health and lower educational attainment, effects that can compound over time to reinforce inequality. The pandemic's economic effects have left millions of vulnerable Americans facing deep rental debt, the threat of evictions, and the loss of basic housing security. Over the course of the last year, as you all know, the Biden administration has provided over $46 billion to prevent eviction as part of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Today, just over 1 year into the Biden administration, ERA programs around the country have provided over 3 million payments to households, helping Americans remain in their homes. Eviction Lab data shows that in the 4 full months since the end of the eviction moratorium in August, eviction filings have remained below 60% of historical levels. This program is working, keeping families safely housed. But that success depends on the help of people like you in communities around the country. As I travel around the country to meet people that are still in their homes because of ERA, they are all grateful for the support of the federal government, but even more grateful for the members of their community, like you, who have shown up to help them during their darkest hour. Putting America in a position to preserve their communities through the pandemic and invest in each other is exactly why the president proposed the American Rescue Plan. Today, as a result of those efforts, we have built a nationwide infrastructure for rental assistance and eviction prevention that did not exist prior to the pandemic, and that will persist even after the pandemic is in the rearview mirror. We hope the tools state and local governments have built to implement the Emergency Rental Assistance Program will be a lasting legacy of our response to the pandemic, creating models to address issues that existed even before this crisis. But before we can focus on the future, we must continue the hard work of preventing evictions during the pandemic. We need your help continuing to advocate for state and local governments across the country to adopt practices that have proven track records of helping rental assistance funds reach households in need. One of the most important practices Treasury recommends is the use of eviction diversion programs, partnerships between local court systems and legal aid providers that help tenants facing eviction to understand their rights, take advantage of emergency rental assistance, and stay in their homes. Programs you'll hear more about shortly from Associate Attorney General Gupta. This is where you and your institutions come in. Many of the law schools here today have played a pivotal role in supporting and staffing these programs. I know firsthand from my own experience as a student in a law school clinic that the work you are doing not only improves lives, it can be one of the most meaningful experiences you have in law school. The opportunity to work directly with families facing eviction from their homes, to help them through the legal process and give them the opportunity to keep roofs over their heads is something you will never forget. So again, thank you for all the hard work you have done and will continue to do to prevent evictions and support our communities. And we look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Secretary, not just for the comments, but your leadership as the department with the line responsibility for the implementation of the emergency rental assistance, for all you've done. And I know we have lots of work to continue going forward. Now I would very happy to introduce the Associate Attorney General, the third highest ranking a member of the Justice Department, Vanita Gupta, is one many of us have worked with and admired. She was the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights under President Obama for 4, challenging years. She led the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights and did so admirably, and is now in the Associate Attorney General position. As I think I've already mentioned, her letter on June 24th was extraordinary. It was made a gigantic difference, and I think was the start of what we are now seeing as a major focus on eviction, not only with the relief fund, the relief that comes to both landlords and tenants in the emergency rental assistance, but for the capacity for it to spur a major national effort on eviction diversion and access to counsel. So with that, Associate Attorney General, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jean. I am truly, truly grateful for your leadership and partnership. You have spurred us all into action in so many ways on this front, and I don't think your contributions can be overstated. I also want to thank Burden Walker in my office and Emily Benfer and the whole team. It takes a lot of folks for staying focused over the last many months on this critical effort. And I want to join the Attorney General and Deputy Secretary Adeyemo in thanking all of the law students, their deans and clinical instructors for answering the Attorney General's call to action. The impact that you've had on your communities and on the lives of so many is so deeply inspiring. And the infrastructure that you've built to respond to the Attorney General's call will prove critical as the Justice Department continues to work to increase access to justice for all Americans. There's no question that the pandemic exacerbated an existing eviction and housing crisis across our country. Over 3 million people were displaced in a typical year. The lifting of the CDC's eviction moratorium and other state and local moratoria across the country only made the problem worse by removing a vital lifeline for so many households. I view the housing crisis as a racial and gender justice issue because of the disproportionate effect the spike in evictions will have on women and people of color. It's a poverty and economic security issue because of the long-lasting effects that we know evictions have on families. And as the CDC has made clear, it's also a public health issue because of the risk of community spread of COVID-19. As the Attorney General discussed for the Justice Department, addressing the housing situation is also a critical part of the department's reinvigorated commitment to increasing access to justice for every American and to reduce the barriers and entrenched disparities in our civil legal systems. We know that losing one's home can have catastrophic economic and psychological consequences on a family. That's why, since last spring, the department's been spearheading an effort to promote the use of court-based eviction diversion strategies. Eviction diversion programs encourage landlords and tenants to resolve disputes without formal litigation. Studies have consistently shown that these programs can significantly increase the likelihood families can remain in their homes. And as the Chief Justice, Mary McCormick of the Michigan Supreme Court has said, eviction diversion are a win-win-win. They help tenants stay in their homes. They help landlords obtain resolve to their complaints and access rental assistance funds. And they make courts more efficient and they increase access to justice. In June, I sent a letter to state court chief justices and court administrators around the country to urge them to implement eviction diversion strategies. The letter highlighted the kinds of actions that some courts had already taken in the hopes that it would inspire other courts to follow. For example, I suggested that courts consider requiring landlords to apply for rental assistance before filing for eviction, as courts had done in Pennsylvania. I urged courts to think about staying pending eviction cases for a period of time to allow litigants to apply for rental assistance, as the Michigan Supreme Court had done. And I recommended that courts consider modifying form summonses and court notices to alert litigants to rental assistance, as the Texas Supreme Court had done. Over the longer term, I encouraged courts to build out more comprehensive programs that might include access to counsel. We know that providing legal counsel to tenants can make an enormous impact on the resolution of eviction cases. For example, a study of Cleveland, Ohio's Right to Counsel program showed that in cases where a legal aid attorney was able to represent a tenant, 93% were able to avoid eviction or an involuntary move. I am incredibly gratified that since last summer, many states have begun to implement diversion programs in their own court systems. In November, the Indiana Supreme Court announced the creation of a new program that will require local housing courts to inform landlords and tenants about the availability of rental assistance and mediation. The New Mexico Supreme Court recently announced that it is piloting a whole system that uses court-based facilitators to encourage early resolution of housing problems. And in New Hampshire, a new court-based program is proactively encouraging tenants and landlords to meet before they reach the courthouse to resolve their disputes ahead of time. If that doesn't work, then mediators are available at the courthouse to encourage resolution and allow families to stay in their homes. I'm hopeful that more and more state courts will implement similar programs in the coming months. But there's no question that these courts cannot do it alone. They need partners like the National Center for State Courts, which recently launched an eviction diversion initiative that will provide funding to state courts to hire staff members and ensure the sustainability of eviction prevention programs. And they need all of you, law students, willing to step up and make a difference to make these programs work. They need you to help connect potential litigants with rental assistance programs, to mediate disputes, and if necessary, to represent the unrepresented in court. We know we have an incredible network of legal services organizations around the country that have stepped up to meet this moment, and we are so grateful. But we also knew that we needed to activate the law school communities around the country to help meet the challenge as well. So thank you again for answering the Attorney General's call and for the time and effort that you've given to keep Americans in their homes. I failed my own law school years at NYU School of Law, no less, doing as many clinics as I could because of the extraordinary experiences they gave me and the impact that I wanted to try to have. It is no exaggeration to say that the work that you have done and are doing has saved lives. I'm inspired by your commitment and really look forward to hearing more about the impact that you will make on your communities and on our country. So please keep working for equal justice for all and stay hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Associate Attorney General Gupta. We're friends, so it's very hard not to just say Vanita, but I'm trying to do titles. But thank you so much. I mean, really, the ongoing and committed effort of both the Attorney General and the Associate Attorney General's office has just been impactful, and it is, you know, much of the reason, if not the main reason, that we are all here today. We're now turning to the part of this session, which is devoted to actually talking about the law school commitments, what is actually happening on the ground with law schools, with clinicals, with students. You know, this is in many ways the heart of our program. I only wish that we had time to do 50 or 60 different discussions with the different efforts that have been done at so many law schools. Picking out only 6, which was not to suggest that there weren't tens and tens as strong, but just to try to pick out examples so that people could understand, to see the tangible effort that has been done in direct connection to the Attorney General's call to action. We wanted to go deep in a few areas and let you see the students and the legal service attorneys who are on the ground doing this. I will say, as the Associate Attorney General said, we really have discussed, and we've heard from so many people, that someday the $46 billion may run out, but the question for many of us is, how do we use that to spur a more lasting reform? And I think what we're talking about today can be that legacy. It may require still more funding, but these type of reforms are going to come from the courts, from people's commitments like yours. To go into this, to the session on law schools and their actions and the commitments by the deans, I just couldn't imagine a better person to kick us off than the second gentleman of the United States, Douglas Emhoff. We're just so grateful that he chose to participate with us, and it's so fitting that he be this person to kick off. And let me just give a couple of reasons why, beyond the fact of being the second gentleman of the United States. I have been living in California for some time because of my wife's profession. And so I'd gotten a chance to meet the second gentleman before any of this had happened, and get a sense of his reputation, how the high, not just the high level excellence he is held in or thought of in terms of his legal work, but his sense of justice and commitment. This is someone who came into this job with really an extraordinary reputation among his peers and in the people he had worked with. And I could go on about what he has done as second gentleman on environment, on gender equity, on many issues. But the one thing I wanted to mention was that the day that the Attorney General convened all the state Supreme Court justices, that was one of just two major events that the Attorney General was doing that day on access to justice. The other was that that three people, the Attorney General, our excellent White House counsel, Dana Remus, and the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, were convening a first of its kind legal aid and interagency roundtable that resulted in very tangible, specific support for legal services, for legal aid. That was part of what happened that day. And when I'd heard the second gentleman speak, and even just recently about his experiences, even on this issue that we're talking about itself and his commitment, it was clear to me that this was the right person to introduce and kick off this session. So, Mr. Second Gentleman, we were really honored and appreciative that you would take that role. So I turn to you.
Gene, thank you so much, and thank you for your leadership on this issue and on everything that you're doing for the American Rescue Plan and this country and your distinguished career. And it's always great when I get to see you behind the scenes. So thank you, Gene, so much. And hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm so honored to join all of you on this important call. And thank you to my friend, Attorney General Merrick Garland, for your words earlier, your leadership in issuing this vital call to action to address the housing and eviction crisis that has brought us all together today. In addition to Gene, Deputy Secretary Adiyamo, and Associate Attorney General Gupta, great to see you both as always, and thank you for your work. And to all of you out there, the law school deans, the clinical professors, the lawyers, the law students, and everyone else interested in this topic, and again, for so quickly mobilizing and answering the Attorney General's call to action. It's incredible. And you have all amplified the importance of expanding access to justice. Now, as second gentleman, but also as a fellow lawyer and now law professor, I am just so personally grateful for all of your efforts to expand access to legal representation. Your work is just so vital right now, because right now, as we speak, so many people, the representation is it's literally the difference between keeping a roof over their family or being pushed out into the streets. That's how critical this is right now. And as you all know, every year, millions of Americans are just shut out of the civil court system and denied their rightful access to justice. And this isn't because they did something wrong. They simply don't have access to legal help. And we've got to fix that. And we are going to fix that. And like all problems facing our country, as has been said, the pandemic has just further magnified this devastating reality, and especially for our nation's most vulnerable populations. Anything that was bad before has been made worse now. The access to justice gap, we'll call it a gap, in America exists not just in certain communities, it exists in every single community in our country. And this is why the Biden-Harris administration is determined to reinvigorate the federal government's role in expanding access to legal representation. And it's why my wife and fellow attorney, Vice President Harris, and I are so deeply, personally committed to fulfilling the promise of equality under law and access to the law and our courts. And it's why I was so inspired to learn that 99 law schools, including where I teach, Georgetown and others, and thousands of law students have responded without hesitation and almost immediately to the Attorney General's call to action on equal justice. Now, to all the people who are going to be presenting later today, to the deans who have charged their law schools to serve justice, to all of you inspired law students out there who have answered this call, to the devoted law school clinical professors who guide their way, and to all those legal service attorneys out there who serve as tireless warriors of access to justice. I've met so many of them around the country. I'm so grateful for the work that you have already done and are yet to do. I'm so appreciative of what many of you have already done to stand beside families that are facing the devastation of eviction, and all you've done to help them navigate some of the most difficult months in our country's history. And again, for all that you will do in the future. The Vice President and I are just so inspired by your robust response to the Attorney General's call to action. We were literally just discussing it this morning at breakfast. We want to be your partners in your demonstrated commitment to build a legal system that is just, fair, and accessible to all. Again, this work is not only literally keeping a roof over someone's head, this is also something that can be personally transformational for you as an attorney. I know it was for me. I remember being a young lawyer in Los Angeles back in the early 90s when my law firm first introduced me to Bet Sedek, literally meaning House of Justice. It was there that I learned about the vitally important work that lawyers and law students can do to provide access to justice for those most in need. Now, fighting wrongful eviction cases as a pro bono attorney underscored not only the power of justice, but also the profound impact of representation on people. I did those cases. They've never left me. The stories of the people we represented have and will always stay with me, and that is why this work is so important to me personally. Those stories underscore that the law is a vehicle for equality and justice, but only if us lawyers ensure it. The families and individuals that I met early on in my career, as well as the ones that I've met recently in my travels as second gentleman, have and will continue to make me a lifelong advocate for access to justice. And they will continue to inspire the work that I will do in the future on this and many other topics. I got to go home to Los Angeles last week. I made a special visit to check in on the team at Bet Sedek. The attorneys I met, who were so incredible, told me about the devastating risks of eviction and homelessness for so many, too many people in our community. And one of the attorneys shared this remarkable story about a 94-year-old World War II veteran. For merely asking a question about a $5 rent increase, his landlord served this man who lived there for years with an eviction notice for threatening management. Legal aid attorneys helped this veteran stay in his home. He was so grateful for the help he was provided that he volunteered to help the organization advocate for more legal aid support, speaking publicly about his circumstances and how legal aid made the difference in his life or death difference. As you all know, there are families and individuals facing similar crises like these in every single community, every single day. It's not only evictions, it's also denial of rightful benefits. It's domestic violence and so many other issues that we see out there as lawyers that have been made worse by COVID. And that's why I'm so thankful for the work of everyone participating in today's event. You have all been providing dignity, housing security, and justice to millions of families across our country. You're also playing an important part in building an eviction policy and indeed a broader legal system that is more just, fair, and accessible to all. I salute all of you, not just for answering this call, but for using your legal skills in furtherance of equal justice. I'm so confident that the impact each of you will make in the months and years ahead and throughout your careers will further the vital cause of access to justice. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's truly an honor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Second Gentleman, not just for your, opening frame on the Access to Justice Challenge, but for your personal reflections about your own work as a young lawyer, and the fact that you were just at Ben Sedek, who, if you live in the California area, is right on the front lines fighting for access to justice and protecting people from evictions every day. Just really goes to your own personal commitment both then and now. So thank you so much for kicking off this really heart of the of our session today on the 99 law schools who answered the Attorney General's call. We were very excited right from the start that with the Attorney General's call, there was such a strong reaction across the board. It's hard to remember what that period was like. August 30th, at the end of the eviction moratorium, there were many experts who predicted there would be a doubling or tripling of eviction. Some people said a eviction tsunami. I truly believe that without all of the efforts, without the over 500,000 payments going to households every month from the emergency rental assistance, without all the efforts on court diversion and leadership, we would have faced a much more dire situation. We never do mission accomplished or celebrations on this because honestly, even when you see the eviction rate at 60% of historic averages, you still see people falling through the cracks and suffering great harm, heartbreaking harm. So this is an area where we're never done. But one of the things that we saw right at the beginning was that we were hearing from law schools, how could they help? And Vanita Gupta and I ended up on the phone with two of your colleagues, Bill Traynor, the Dean of Georgetown, and Trevor Morrison, the Dean of NYU. And we said, we're hearing interest. Is it possible, that you could help reach out and see if there are 10 or 15 people who'd be deans who'd be interested in their law schools. And I'll be honest, we would have thought that would have been a very significant response to the call to action. One of the first reactions that that Trevor and Bill came back with, which was, well, one great partner we're going to have is Angela Onwuachi-Willig, the Dean of Boston University, because she is tremendous and inspired and ready to go. And so I wanted to now turn over to Bill and to Trevor to thank them for their efforts in trying to help on the organization, and also have Dean Onwuachi-Willig speak as well as the opening on behalf of the deans. Obviously, the reason we're here today is the fact that 99 law schools, deans and their law schools answered the call. It's extraordinary. Again, we wish we could have more time to talk with all of you. So the law school deans and the programs, the 6 programs we'll go through, are just merely representative of, I really think an extraordinary call to action in an area that has been deeply neglected in our country, despite the fact that the harm that results from lack of legal counsel in evictions can be one of the most devastating, not only for the renters themselves, but the long-term emotional and education and economic impact of their families and their children. So with that, let me first turn over to Dean Traynor and Dean Morrison to speak first, and then to hand over to Dean Onwuachi-Willig. So for the 3 of you, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Gene. And it's an honor and a privilege to be speaking with you today. When Dean Morrison and I learned of the Attorney General's call to action, we immediately went to work recruiting other deans to join our statement of support. It was a Saturday, and as Gene just said, we were hoping to have 10 or maybe 15 join us by Monday. And we were absolutely overwhelmed with the response we received in that time frame. 99 schools and 100 deans answered the call to action. But I should not have been surprised by my fellow deans' willingness to join the Attorney General's call to action. The response was powerful and it was impactful. Millions of people were facing an immediate tragedy of epic proportions. And as deans charged with training the next generation of lawyers, we have an obligation to use our resources to work towards a more just society. Because of the leadership of the 100 deans, law students across the country, many on this call today, have enlisted in the effort in ways that have been so helpful for so many people as they face the consequences of eviction. As we heard from the Associate Attorney General, these actions have certainly saved lives. Over 2,100 students dedicated over 81,000 hours to serving over 10,000 households since the Attorney General's call to action, and that is just astonishing. We've heard that for many students, this experience was transformative, that it's led them to think that their career as lawyers should be responding to the housing crisis. And we've heard for others interested in practicing in other areas of the law that they have learned that this would be a meaningful and significant pro bono activity for them. At Georgetown Law, our students and faculty are committed to our motto, law is but the means, justice is the end. When our community learned about the eviction crisis threatening so many District of Columbia residents, we understood the threat to justice and took the opportunity to help in whatever ways we could. For instance, 30 students volunteered over the weekends to help residents complete rental assistance applications at pop-up clinics organized by the DC Office of Attorney General. And our clinics work to represent clients facing financial insecurity and evictions. 14 of our students last summer enrolled in a housing advocacy litigation clinic with Range for Justice, joining students from George Washington University Law School and American University Law School. And together, they prevented over 24 scheduled evictions, 24 families who were not evicted. The Health Justice Alliance, our medical legal partnership working in DC's lowest income communities, did public benefits checkups for all of their clients to assess and advocate for any benefits they might be entitled to, and provided assistance and legal representation to patient families to promote their financial and housing security. Equally important, our students educated community residents at risk of eviction about options for assistance. The Health Justice Alliance trained their medical partners who serve low-income patients about eviction prevention, including emergency rental assistance and other strategies for housing security promotion, so that they could identify patients who needed assistance. And they distributed 500 flyers about emergency rental assistance and eviction prevention to their medical partners working in 2 of DC's lowest income schools. This work will continue. Before I turn matters over to Dean Morrison, I want to leave you with a short reflection from one of our students. This student, as a result of this initiative, assisted tenants with filling out rental assistance applications. Although she had participated in numerous service opportunities assisting people experiencing homelessness, she said, quote, "That work comes at a point in someone's journey when any number of struggles have had time to accumulate." She described her work on this initiative as the most powerful because it, quote, saved people from eviction. So for many families, for so many people across the country, this has been transformative and an extraordinary opportunity for all of our law schools and students. And we're all so proud to be part of this initiative. So again, it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be part of this initiative. And let me now turn matters over to Dean Trevor Morrison.
Thanks, Dean Traynor. It's a real privilege and pleasure to be working with you on this initiative. together with Gene Sperling, the Associate Attorney General Vinita Gupta, who's a graduate of our law school, and so many others. The Attorney General's call to action resonated as deeply as it did with law schools across the country because our institutions are firmly committed to training the next generation of lawyers to be responsible and impactful stewards of an effective, equitable, and just legal system. Drawing on resources such as our pro bono programs, clinical and externship offerings, and the service of our larger law school communities, we deans pledged on behalf of our faculty and students and larger communities to do our part in ensuring that families and individuals facing eviction have the legal representation, counseling, and assistance they need to understand and exercise their rights, in ensuring that those entitled to the support of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program are able to access it, and in promoting fairness and justice in eviction proceedings in our communities. At NYU Law, our clinical program through our housing law externship has long served New Yorkers in need of housing-related assistance. This externship involves a partnership with outstanding attorneys at the Legal Aid Society. And working with those attorneys, our students have helped New Yorkers apply for support from the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. They've helped fight illegal evictions, and they've helped tenants obtain necessary repairs to their homes, which became even more crucial at a time when many New Yorkers were at home in quarantine. In a typical year, 10 NYU Law students participate in this externship. But this year, in response to Attorney General Garland's call to action, an additional 60 students volunteered to assist in the critical effort to respond to the eviction crisis. Beyond that, our faculty and students have deepened our working relationship with the Legal Aid Society to develop the Tenant Defense Collective, a coalition of law students, social work students, and legal services attorneys who are committed to helping New Yorkers access emergency rental assistance in order to avoid the worst consequences for tenants at risk. As volunteer participation in these efforts has increased exponentially in response to the Attorney General's call, so too have our education and outreach efforts, not only to tenants, but to local elected officials and community-based organizations on the front lines of this issue. In providing legal support to New York tenants and promoting awareness of and access to federal and state rental assistance programs, we've been able to help tenants and landlords alike. And as Dean Traynor said, this work will continue well into the future. Our commitment to this important work will endure. And now I'm happy to turn things over to Angela Onwuachi-Willig, the Dean at Boston University.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sperling, and thank you, Deans Morrison and Traynor. It's an honor and privilege to address this distinguished group on such an important topic. When the Supreme Court ruled against extending protections for tenants that have been put in place due to the COVID-related financial crisis, millions of residents across the nation faced the threat of eviction. Attorney General Merrick Garland's call to action mobilized law schools to help those most vulnerable to losing their homes. With a history of providing pro bono representation to families facing eviction from the founding of our first legal aid clinic more than 50 years ago, one of the oldest programs of its kind and now known as a civil litigation and justice program, Boston University School of Law was prepared to heed the Attorney General's call by leveraging technology to help tenants through MAID. Few things are as disruptive or more disruptive and destructive to a person's life than eviction. You lose your home, your community, your stability. Basically, with eviction, you lose all that you have known all at once. Eviction affects your mental health and your well-being, even when you're not in the middle of a pandemic. And it's 100 times worse when you are. Eviction begins a cycle of economic hardship that is frequently impossible to climb out of. And for some, eviction can become a death sentence. I understand these pains from personal experience because I've seen family members suffer the sting of eviction, including through illegal tactics like lockouts. For students who were inspired to action during the eviction crisis, I hope they have learned how fulfilling it can be to help others, to give voice to the voiceless. I hope they have learned that many landlords fail to follow eviction law because their tenants often do not know their rights and often do not have lawyers to represent them. That said, in no way do I mean to discount the financial losses to landlords. Their losses are very real, and contrary to popular belief, some landlords are only a paycheck ahead of their own tenants. Because a global pandemic is the root cause of the current eviction crisis, we have to seek a solution that both protects tenants' rights and reimburses landlords for their losses. But we also have to recognize that the eviction crisis is only a symptom of a larger problem, a nationwide access to justice crisis. It is a simple fact that legal services are financially out of reach for many middle class, working class, and low-income individuals. Approximately 80% of people who would qualify for free legal assistance cannot obtain it. Therefore, it is absolutely essential for law schools to play a role in expanding access to legal representation for underserved populations, both directly through clinical work and indirectly by instilling in our students and alumni a responsibility to serve the most vulnerable people among us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for all three presentations and for all the work each of you have done organizing and implementing. And I think as Dean Owachi Willig rightly said, talking very tangibly and specifically about an access to justice crisis that we are trying, or a gap, as the second gentleman said, which we are trying to close. In doing the, we're now going to hear from some of the different projects, which I feel are just extraordinary. I'm so inspired by what we've actually seen law students and clinical professors, doing on the ground, and the innovation and the passion. It's just extraordinary. We're going to have two different people introduced at different times. The last few will be introduced by Emily Benfer, who is on leave from Wake Forest. She was part of the initial team we consulted with at the eviction, that the eviction lab convened for us, for Eric and I, in April, May, and we were able to steal her for a year. You may have heard that beneath the Attorney General and Associate Attorney General and myself, that Burden Walker in the Department of Justice and Emily Benfer have really carried the major load in helping to organize the day that we are part of right now. So Emily Benfer will be one of our introducers. Our first will be Ron Flagg. And I have to take a moment here just to say, first of all, Ron Flagg, as president of Legal Service Corporation, has been one of our key partners and advisors from early on, from when this was first starting, when things were at their most difficult. We were working together with Ron. And I think when you talk about that access to justice gap, what I kind of think about a little is the phone calls that Ron would organize with the legal service attorneys around the country who are working on this. I thought to myself afterwards, this is like the legal MASH unit of the COVID crisis. They are on the ground, on the front lines, and sadly, they are triaging, working around the clock. You can admire those round the clock hours, but it shouldn't be that way. And when I think of the law students and the clinicals that have come up today, I think of the cavalry coming, because we ought to be doing more for our legal services. We ought to do more for those on the front line. We ought to do more to help them not have to triage, but to try to serve everyone who comes through that door. And I think that really is so much at the heart of what we're doing here. So I'm going to have Ron do the introductions, and the first few things we're going to hear about are specifically where law students and law school students and law schools are indeed partnering and working with legal services, which we've seen on the pro bono side as well, where those programs only seem to work when there's a legal service lawyer unit that is willing to connect, make assignments. So with that, I'm now going to turn over to my friend and partner, Ron Flagg, the president of the Legal Service Corporation.
Thank you, Gene, and thank you for your leadership. Every tenant in America is entitled to certain rights under laws of the jurisdiction in which they live. But these legal rights are not self-enforcing. Our judicial systems around the country for enforcing these rights were largely built by lawyers on the assumption that people using the systems would be represented by lawyers. In many categories of life-altering cases, that assumption is false. In eviction cases across the country in many jurisdictions, over 90% of tenants are unrepresented, while over 90% of landlords are represented. Overall, the legal aid providers that LSC funds turn away over 40% of the eligible clients who make it to their door for lack of resources. As has been cited several times today, our 2017 Justice Gap study showed that only 14% of the civil legal problems confronted by low-income Americans receive adequate legal assistance. And that was in the good old days before the pandemic, which has caused a surge in unemployment and other civil legal problems. Our 2022 Justice Gap study that LSC will be releasing in April will show, not surprisingly, that the already enormous justice gap is widening. This justice gap underscores the critical need to supplement legal aid resources with pro bono and other resources. I am truly and profoundly grateful to all of you, America's law schools and law students, who have answered that call during the pandemic to help fill the gap. You have made a true difference. I'm honored to introduce 4 heroes who have led such efforts. First, we'll hear about the Safe and Stable Homes Project, in which law students from multiple schools across Atlanta supported both legal aid and pro bono attorneys. Our first 2 speakers will be Darius Woods, a staff attorney from Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, and Ray Freesone, a second-year law student at Atlanta's John Marshall Law School. Darius?
And thank you, Mr. Flagg, for that introduction. Before I get started, I want to give a special shout out to my colleagues and other legal services attorneys and staff who help train and mobilize law students to meet the Attorney General's call to action. At the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, or AVLF for short, our mission is to create safe and stable homes and families by inspiring the fight for equal justice under the law. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, legal nonprofits across Georgia have experienced an influx of low-income families facing housing instability. At AVLF, we witnessed firsthand a knowledge gap about the resources available to tenants like emergency rental assistance and other protections under the law. In response, our organization, along with Georgia Legal Services Program and the Atlanta Legal Aid Society, sought assistance from law students to increase our capacity. We created several initiatives, from calling tenants the week prior to their eviction hearing and connecting them to our eviction hotline, to expediting our intake process by using students to conduct the initial screen of tenants. Fortunately for us, the law students in Georgia, they stepped up. Thanks to the Attorney General's call to action, hundreds of law students volunteer for legal services organizations in Georgia. AVLF's Safe and Stable Homes program alone had over 300 volunteer slots filled by law students. And along with the students from the Georgia Legal Services Program, we served hundreds of clients. We hope to continue to harness the power of law students to increase our capacity and provide quality assistance and resources to vulnerable tenants throughout Georgia. On that note, I'd like to pass it over to one of our spectacular law student volunteers from Atlanta Johns Marshall School of Law, Ray Freisen, who will speak about her experience answering the call.
Thank you, Darius. I would like to begin by saying I did not initially know there were so many out there working towards the same cause as myself. And I am honored to be associated with such amazing people doing so many inspiring things. So thank you to each of you. Excuse me. To begin, the impact of the pandemic on my family led me to wanting to help others who could be struggling to stay afloat. I quickly learned the obstacles I had experienced, such as parenting and working from home, were amplified in other families to a much greater extent. As a student at Atlanta's John Marshall Law School, I'm encouraged to develop a strong social awareness and provide support in our community. When the Attorney General made his call to action, I responded. I volunteered at a helpathon by Free Legal Answers organized by Paul Wilson in our Office of Experiential Learning and Pro Bono program. During that experience, the overwhelming eviction questions asked caught me by surprise. Afterwards, I was so inspired to continue this work that I volunteered with the GLSP. My role there was to interview applicants for rental assistance facing homelessness due to the end of the moratorium. At times, I fought back tears, hearing how so many had lacked access to public transportation, childcare, even electricity. The domino effect that resulted was endless. I found these stories to be some of the most difficult situations I have ever heard. Two stories have particularly stood out to me and have motivated me since. One applicant quit her job due to her 3 children being sent home for remote schooling. 2 of her children were autistic. She had accrued back rent, late fees, and some of her utilities had been cut off as a result. She had no access to the internet and struggled with the application process to receive rental assistance. As a mother, hearing another mother cry for help, I imagined the world was on her shoulders. I imagined that this woman was so desperate for help, and I wanted to provide that help for her. I also encountered a woman who had no power. She had lost her job. Her car was repossessed. Her phone was shut off. The only income was from her son, who worked in a sugar mill. After the moratorium ended, she was left with back rent for over 6 months with accrued fees. She had no access to public transportation due to the rural location, no access to internet, and she and her son were sharing his phone. While waiting for the sheriff to arrive and put them on the street, she ended up telling me, well, asking rather, what can I do next? What's next? After hearing that she and her son were waiting for the sheriff to arrive to put them out on the street and their next option was to sleep in their car, that question hit me very hard. I almost forgot what to say. And after informing her about what the rental assistance program offered for the first time, she let herself show some emotion and she cried in relief. My school provided the opportunity to extend a small fraction of help by determining the hindrances that many of us could easily overlook as basic human needs. In the beginning, I thought I understood how this pandemic had impacted everyone. But it wasn't until this experience, responding to the Attorney General's call to action, that I realized how this crisis affected so many people. We can't ever understand the extent of hardship people are going through, but we can stand beside them and make housing stability a reality. I look forward to providing support in my community, and I hope that one day we are one step closer to achieving that unity that I've seen in our collective efforts to answer the call to action. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Next, we'll hear about the Tenant Assistance Project in Nebraska, and we'll be hearing from Rachel Tomlinson Dick, a third-year law student at the University of Nebraska. Rachel?
Thank you, Mr. Flagg. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to be here among such amazing housing justice heroes. Lincoln, Nebraska is likely not a place that comes to mind when people think about the eviction crisis. But unfortunately, Nebraska has some of the most unfair eviction laws in the nation. For example, tenants do not need to be provided actual notice of upcoming eviction hearings. Until recently, this resulted in many tenants being completely unaware they were being evicted until a sheriff or constable came to their home and forcibly removed them and placed their belongings on the sidewalk. Even for those tenants who did learn of a pending eviction action and went to court to try to keep their home, the laws were stacked against them, and less than 2% had legal representation. Over 80% of these cases resulted in tenants being displaced, generally on the same day as their hearing, even though research from that same period revealed that over half the evictions filed were brought unlawfully. Early in the COVID-19 pandemic, when all state court hearings were halted except for evictions and debt collections, Professor Ryan Sullivan started the Tenant Assistance Program, or TAP for short. TAP ensures that every residential tenant facing eviction in Nebraska's 2 most populous counties has access to free legal counsel at court. TAP functions as a coalition between numerous partners, including the University of Nebraska College of Law, the Nebraska Bar Association, and the City of Lincoln's Commission on Human Rights, with many other organizations such as Legal Aid of Nebraska providing support and resources. Shortly before the Attorney General issued his call to action, Alan Duggar, myself, and several other students began working to establish an organization at Nebraska Law focused on supporting TAP's efforts by recruiting, training, and coordinating student volunteers. Attorney General Garland's call to action and our Dean Richard Moberly's swift and enthusiastic response to it helped us to expand from a small group of dedicated volunteers to a community of students engaging with efforts to prevent mass eviction in our state. Our student organization has 3 symbiotic areas within which it coordinates volunteers, all of which are critical to TAP's ability to help vulnerable tenants. First, students assist with outreach, visiting the homes of every tenant with an upcoming eviction hearing to ensure they have notice and provide them with a packet of information and resources. Law student volunteers also create eviction defense packets for every eviction hearing on the docket each week. Each packet contains an overview of the case and lists all possible defenses that a volunteer attorney could bring on the tenant's behalf. Finally, law students volunteer at the courthouse, where they greet tenants as they arrive for hearings, help conduct intakes, act as court observers, and in the case of senior certified students, directly represent tenants under the supervision of a practicing attorney. Astoundingly, TAP has a 98% success rate of preventing immediate eviction and has helped over 400 Nebraska families just since the call to action. Additionally, over $9 million in emergency rental assistance has been distributed directly because of TAP's efforts. Contributing to this work has shown me the impact that is possible when people within the legal community prioritize working to prevent injustice in tangible ways. I resolutely agree with the Attorney General that ensuring access to justice, irrespective of wealth or status, is one of the highest ideals of the legal profession. I'm profoundly grateful to my role models, mentors, and peers who work to bring this aspiration closer to reality. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Finally, to share the Law School and Legal Services Eviction Prevention Partnership in Michigan, we're joined by Daniel Ellman, Assistant Clinical Professor and Director of Externships at Wayne State University Law School. Dan?
Thank you, Ron. Good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank the Office of the Attorney General, the second gentleman, the Deputy Secretary, and Gene Sperling for the opportunity to speak to such a distinguished audience. I'd also like to recognize our Dean, Dean Bierschbach, who has spearheaded Wayne Law's response to the AG's call to action. And finally, I'd like to recognize our students. Your energy and your commitment are really what drive our project, and you deserve so much of the credit. When the Attorney General issued the call to action last summer, that struck really close to home for us at our law school. Wayne Law is located at the heart of Detroit, and Detroit experienced severe housing issues even before the pandemic began. We knew that the end of the eviction moratorium would send thousands of people suddenly at risk of losing their home, and we knew that we had to do something about that. Immediately after the call to action, Dean Bierschbach gathered together the directors of our experiential learning department, the pro bono department, and the student board of governors to figure out what we could do. And at that time, Detroit Housing Court was facing hundreds of eviction cases every day, with the vast majority of tenants unrepresented and unprotected. So to fill that gap, we teamed up with the City of Detroit, Lakeshore Legal Aid, and the United Community Housing Coalition to create the Warrior Eviction Defense Corps. The idea was for law students to fill this critical gap in legal services. We designed the core so that law students would first be trained by Lakeshore Legal Aid and then supervised in the field by experienced attorneys. And we wanted as many students as possible to participate, so we tried to create a lot of options. Currently, our students staff eviction dockets, conduct client intake, draft pleadings, and negotiate conditional dismissals. And they also conduct neighborhood canvassing and direct community outreach with Detroit's eviction prevention team. The response from the students has been truly incredible. By the end of this semester, our students will have committed 1,900 hours to direct service work doing eviction defense. And even more than that, what really stand out are the individual experiences of the students. I had a student recently reach out to me just to tell me how much the core meant to him. He said that representing people who are facing eviction, that's the reason he came to law school, to stand up for people that needed him the most. We think the core has done really important work and made a lot of contributions, but we know that there's a lot more that we need to do and it needs to get done. So as we look ahead, in addition to eviction defense, we envision the core embracing other housing issues, like the right to counsel in landlord-tenant cases and deplorable housing conditions that continue to exist. But we've also heard about the work of so many other law schools. We welcome collaboration and teamwork and even just the exchange of ideas. So please feel free to reach out to us and we will certainly do the same. We know that we face a really tough road ahead, but it's so inspiring to be in a room with so many people dedicated to this cause, and we look forward to continuing this work together. Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Professor Ellman. And now it's my pleasure and honor to pass the mic to my colleague, the indefatigable and indispensable Emily Benford.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you to our speakers whose efforts exemplify the tremendous response from schools across the country who answered the Attorney General's call and confronted this wicked and inhumane problem of eviction and its life-threatening and altering consequences. Our next speakers demonstrate the power of acting in solidarity with the community, the impact that students can have when they join together in adamant refusal to accept injustice and inequality, and the importance of housing to health and every aspect of thriving as a human being. These stewards of justice engaged in community and client-centered lawyering and broke down barriers to ensure that adults and children on the precipice of eviction received the help that they urgently needed to stay safely housed. I'm delighted to first introduce Narinda Brown-Hyatt, an associate professor of law and the director of the Civil Justice Clinic at Rutgers University Law School, where students mobilize to launch direct actions in marginalized and low-income communities. Professor Hyatt.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you to the Attorney General and the White House for convening us. The courthouse in Essex County, New Jersey, where the law school sits, has been closed for L&T trials since March 2020. All hearings take place over Zoom. Notice to tenants is uneven and entry into the Zoom is difficult for many, which has created significant access to justice issues. This was the scenario that we at the Rutgers Civil Justice Clinic were faced with when the Attorney General made his call. How would we make tenants aware of pending cases, available rental assistance, and legal representation in the middle of a pandemic, all while the courthouse was closed? The answer, go to the people. We developed an anti-eviction project, two components of which I want to briefly summarize right now for you. With our 8 3L students, clinic students, we focused on direct representation, facing tenants who were subject to eviction by the largest evictor in the city. We searched for every pending case that this one evictor filed by the start of the semester. We then sought to locate each tenant to notify them of the pending case, how to access upcoming hearings on Zoom, and offered the clinic as counsel. We had to use non-conventional avenues beyond mailing letters, which we worried about with postal delays. Students went to tenants' homes to drop letters, searched online for phone numbers to make calls and send texts, and sent direct messages to social media accounts that they could find. Once we found the tenants with pending cases, we helped them certify for ERAP and represented them at hearings and at trial. We touched about 64 families with our direct representation strategy. We labeled our Know Your Rights campaign, which was the second prong of our action, Stop Evicting Newark. And it was built in partnership with a tremendous community organization, Newark Water Coalition. The 2L pro bono students participated in the coalition's weekly clean water and whole food distributions. The pro bono students created one-pagers, multiple short informational videos, and social media posts that they circulated broadly in the community, all urging tenants threatened with eviction to register for emergency rental assistance and to contact the clinic for further help and legal assistance. We reached a couple of hundred families with this approach. In an effort to recognize the assistance the coalition provided to our project and not to take Black and brown labor without compensation, the clinic offered in-kind payments of legal services to the nonprofit and contributed to purchases of food and water for the distributions. I've learned so much by watching Anthony and the Newark Water Coalition move, and I'm trying to emulate their community first model in the clinic going forward. By doing this work in a two-pronged fashion, our goal was to touch as many tenants as we could in the most accessible, transparent manner possible and ensure, one, that tenants were not missing court dates, two, that tenants knew emergency rental assistance was available and how to access it, and three, that tenants were aware the clinic could represent them if they had a pending eviction case in court. But hopefully also to do so without sacrificing our pedagogical values as a clinic and while building on the energy and scaffolding of our already established pro bono student housing group to develop a pipeline of future housing attorneys. As I conclude, I want to offer deep thanks to the New Jersey Legislature for financial support, co-deans Quizon Vilazar and Mutcherson, Clinic Dean John Dubin, our Camden colleagues who also engaged in housing justice work in response to the Attorney General's call, RU alum Victor Monterosa, who rejoined the clinic full-time to increase capacity, and especially to the students, of course, the Newark Housing Rights Coalition at Rutgers Law School for recruiting and training 30 pro bono students, 2L Asia Norton, and clinic student 3L Gianna Sanguinetti, both of whom are in the room today. The AG's call brought all of these RU stakeholders to a common table to stop evictions in New Jersey. Thank you so much for including us.
Thank you, Professor Hyatt, to you and your students for your powerful housing justice work. Now we will turn to Professor Jesse Hamilton McCoy II, who is a clinical professor of law at Duke University School of Law, where faculty and students heeded the Attorney General's call by creating a new court-based eviction prevention legal clinic. Professor McCoy.
Thank you, Emily. At the time of the call to action, there was an increasing concern about several issues. There was the impact of evictions on the COVID infection rate, the impact of evictions on the economy, and the most effective means of administering government aid. However, what is often lost is the focus on the people impacted locally. Durham, North Carolina has been in the midst of an eviction crisis for years, which has only been exacerbated by COVID. And here it is common that life's minor setbacks for some are absolute catastrophes for others. And the ways in which COVID harmed our neighbors was particularly insidious. People lost jobs or missed work due to quarantine or illness or the need to care for children who were now learning remotely. People lost connection with their friends and family support systems, and people also ended up being hospitalized. As such, Duke Law School and its Civil Justice Clinic heeded the call and recognized the immense and immediate need for help and the unique position we're in to be able to do something about it. So in addition to continuing our pre-existing eviction diversion program, in early September, our clinic director, Charles Holton, our student coordinator, Amanda Jews, and I established the Eviction Advice Clinic. The purpose of this clinic was to host a human interface that could provide legal advice to community members facing eviction or substandard housing conditions, while also serving as a proxy for community members seeking to apply for emergency rental assistance funds administered at that time by Durham County's Department of Social Services. We also sought the help of student volunteers and were overwhelmed when one volunteer announcement generated over 50 interested students. Our advice clinic operated every Friday from 9 a.m. to 12 noon from September through January at the Durham County Courthouse. And in just those 4 months, we were able to advise, empower, and in some cases immediately represent just shy of 100 individuals who otherwise would have been left on their own to figure out how to simultaneously navigate the court system, gather a myriad of documents needed to qualify for financial assistance, and locate the emergency rental assistance providers. We were also able to encourage magistrates and judges to provide information about the advice clinic to litigants appearing before them in summary ejectment hearings. As a native of Durham, I am proud of the response that the Duke Law community provided in helping the people of my hometown. However, this crisis is far from over. I hope that we in the legal community continue to exercise our obligation to help those who are most vulnerable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Professor McCoy, to you and your team for ensuring equal access to justice across the community. Our final law school presenter, Katie Merlin, a third-year law student at Wake Forest University, partnered with her law school community to collaborate with a health clinic and a local emergency rental assistance program to identify families in need and ensure their housing stability. Katie.
Thank you, Ms. Benfer. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank the White House and the Department of Justice for convening this event, Attorney General Garland for igniting this movement, and Second Gentleman Douglas Emhoff for your encouragement and solidarity in the cause of securing access to justice. When the Attorney General issued the call to action, our Dean, Jane Aiken, mobilized the Medical Legal Partnership Clinic and the Pro Bono program to respond. Under the supervision of Professor Allison Gold, we implemented a multifaceted strategy to address the eviction crisis. It was clear to us that emergency rental assistance is the most direct and swift way to relieve tenants from the imminent threat of eviction. First, we partnered with the county's ERA program to increase outreach and applications in the most vulnerable neighborhoods. We developed dual language informational flyers and posters and partnered with trusted community leaders to canvass, raise awareness, and encourage tenants to apply for funds. Second, we collaborated with medical and undergraduate students to hold multiple ERA workshops for low-income patients at the local health clinic. We offered on-site application assistance to tenants and screened for their legal needs. Third, we hosted trainings for over 50 medical providers serving the highest risk communities. We emphasized the devastating consequences of eviction and housing instability to patient health, and trained providers to refer patients to us for help with ERA and legal representation in evictions. Between direct representation and outreach, our clinic served approximately 110 households. Our collaboration with frontline healthcare providers enabled us to reach those high-risk families and create a holistic, community-wide approach to the housing crisis. Together, we ensured that families had the foundational rock and security of a home at a time when the risk of homelessness was at its height. This would not have been possible without ERA's unprecedented funding. We believe access to the American Rescue Plan's ERA program is the reason that eviction rates are at historic lows in our community. There is one client in particular whose story demonstrates the impact of the ERA program. When we met Mr. G at our on-site workshop in November of 2021, he didn't believe he was eligible for ERA funds. His young son had just contracted COVID, and Mr. G had spent the last 2 weeks away from work nursing him back to health and had just received an eviction notice. Without assistance, they were at imminent risk of homelessness. We quickly submitted his application that same day. I know I will never forget the relief in his voice when I called to tell him that his application had been approved and that he and his family would be able to spend the holidays at home without fear of displacement. Having recently witnessed my own mother experience the trauma of housing insecurity, I'm reminded how ubiquitous the threat of eviction is and how it is our duty as legal advocates to do everything in our power to support those in need, especially during this difficult time. Answering this call to action has been, as the second gentleman stated, deeply transformational. I am dedicating my career to the pursuit of housing and health justice and ending the cycle of trauma associated with eviction. I think for all of us here today, this work and the lived experiences of our clients will continue to guide us in the unyielding effort to achieve housing security and equal justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, for your justice stewardship, and to the thousands of students who, like you, are beacons of hope across the country. You give us all confidence that a future of housing justice is in reach. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jean Sperling to introduce our last speaker.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. I have to say, I did not hear one person in the presentation that I would not like to have representing me in court. You also heard that that a lot of what people were doing was providing counseling and assistance to prevent having to get there. And so it is very true that counsel and counseling is critical. And I want to acknowledge the Department of Housing Urban Development HUD, who are great partners with us in this effort and take a lot of the leadership on the counseling side, which is a good lead-in to our last speaker to close, which is Erica Pothig, who's the Special Assistant to the President for Housing and Urban Development at the White House Domestic Policy Council that is run by Susan Rice. Erica is really our lead housing person across all housing issues inside the White House. She has certainly been my partner.
I'm so sorry, this is so short. Okay.
It's certainly been my partner in coordinating
has been
an
briefed.
all of government White House effort on eviction prevention. So the only thing I will say before I turn to her is to say it is not easy to get the Attorney General and the second gentleman on the same day, but if there is a desire among the students doing this to have additional conversations with us, not perhaps at this high level, this does not need to be one and done. You are our partners. We admire what you're doing. So if there are law students, law schools out there who would like to coordinate some further dialogue with us, I want you to know I can't promise you the Attorney General and second gentleman every time, but I think you'll find Erica and I and other people at Treasury and Justice can be there and helpful. So this, again, can be an ongoing dialogue. With that, I want to turn over to Erica Pothig to close our really excellent session today. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you for your leadership and the leadership of so many who have been acknowledged already on this call. I'm grateful to be able to have joined you today, to be inspired by your stories, and to be able to be the last person to thank you all for your extraordinary efforts. I know I take away from today's conversation the inspiration that my colleagues do, but I see in the future a new generation of housing advocates that have been born out of this time. And that excites me probably more than anything, in addition to the service that you have done to your fellow citizens and those facing housing instability. So thank you. Thank you so much for all that you have done. As Jean mentioned, preventing evictions has been and will continue to be a pillar on the president's housing agenda. And because of your efforts and the efforts of so many federal agencies across the board, because this has been a whole of government effort, state and local governments, we have collectively averted an eviction crisis, yet continued to be humbled by those who still face a crisis ahead. I want to end by some reflections on another housing issue that we have been working on that has also benefited from the efforts of so many providing access to justice. And that is the crisis faced by homeowners in this country who've also been affected by the COVID crisis. Over the last 2 years, 8 million homeowners entered mortgage forbearance programs that helped them avoid foreclosure. The CARES Act established a foreclosure moratorium and other kinds of supports, which the Biden-Harris administration extended last year. Now, these measures were a lifeline during a period of great instability. The vast majority of these homeowners have found financial stability again, but over 900,000 homeowners are still in mortgage forbearance today. And the majority of these homeowners have mortgages backed by federal agencies like the Federal Housing Administration, for instance, at HUD. Now, the positive point here is that we have more tools to help these homeowners come out of this crisis on firmer footing and avoid foreclosure. And we're doing this in two major ways: by reducing mortgage payments for borrowers with FHA, USDA, VA-backed mortgages and those guaranteed by the Federal Housing Finance Agency, and through another program that was made possible through the American Rescue Plan called the Homeowners Assistance Fund, which provides $9.6 billion that states are administering, which complement the administration's other borrower relief efforts. Now, as we head into this year, we know that mortgage forbearance periods are ending for so many homeowners, and legal aid attorneys are once again on the front lines to help these homeowners navigate their options. Our relationship with organizations like the Legal Services Corporation and the National Consumer Law Center have been critical as we ensure homeowners can stay in their homes and preserve their wealth. Now, you may or may not remember in the last housing crisis that so much wealth was stripped from Black and Brown homeowners. Over 2 million homeowners lost their home to foreclosure. And this resulted in the increase in racial and ethnic wealth gaps due to the loss of home equity for so many Black and Brown communities. Well, the Biden-Harris administration is committed to ensuring that this doesn't happen again and that we enable homeowners to preserve the wealth, especially in the current market. So over the next year, we will continue to focus on efforts to prevent evictions and foreclosure, but also efforts to expand access to housing through the expansion of rental assistance, which the president requested in the FY22 budget, and hopefully through the Build Back Better agenda, which would create or preserve and improve more than 1 million homes. That creation of housing will also help to lower housing prices that eats into so many family budgets. This is just a few of the priorities in the very expansive agenda that also includes an expanded approach to addressing and ending homelessness, which the American Rescue Plan has also made some critical investments in. Jean promised other sessions we're happy to do to explore other parts of the agenda, but I just want to close today by thanking you all again for playing such a critical role in this moment in American history that I hope we look back on and see that what we did mattered and that people's livelihoods were protected because of the work that you did. Thank you all so much. With that, let me turn it back to Jean to close. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you all. This has been extraordinary. We want to keep this partnership going. As I said, Erica said, we're just very appreciative. If there's additional sessions that we can have, Q&A, other things we can do, this is an ongoing partnership. Your efforts are not one and done with us. We don't want them to be one and done. I think if there's been a theme throughout this, it has been that this crisis existed before the pandemic and just got worse. An eviction crisis, an access to justice crisis. Just want to thank our extraordinary partners in the Justice Department, the Attorney General, Vanita Gupta, the second gentleman, for being here, all of you, particularly the law students who have really risen to the occasion. And we look forward to more action, helping people. Every avoidable eviction is an avoidable heartbreak. And we're very committed to preventing as much as possible and doing what we can to close, as the second gentleman said, this access to justice gap. So thank you very much to everyone. And we look forward to further sessions, further dialogue, further constructive partnership. Thank you.